on the billions of dollars being taken.
Scammers, as we know, are becoming more and more sophisticated.
Lying in bed, wondering how I could tell my wife that we'd lost everything.
Our mission is to protect consumers worldwide from scams. Cybercrime is going through the roof and we need to take action fast.
We cannot keep on working in silos, and we've heard it here a couple of times already today. I think GASA is bringing this cross-sector perspective that is so much lacking in most of the events.
I'm hoping to start finding ways to help take the information I have and really help people.
These type of events are finally going to hear we took action instead of we need to take action and make the world a little bit better.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Global Anti-Scam Alliance meetup. We are here today to discuss the anti-scam centers. Before I start, maybe the video already introduced us a little bit. I'm George Abraham. I'm the Managing Director of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance. We're non-profit, and our goal is to protect people worldwide from scams. And we do that by bringing together all the stakeholders: government, law enforcement, financial services, telecom industry, social media, to share knowledge on scams, but also really define better solutions to protect people from scams. And today we're here to discuss national anti-scam centers. But before we start, a few general notes. We are recording, so the video will be made available online after this meetup. If you have questions, please use the chat, but also be aware that if your question is interesting, we might post it together with your name in the video. So if you do not want to be with your name in the recording, then please use a different name or ask the question in a different way. Maybe briefly introducing the topic. As I think most of you know, scams are a global cross-industry problem, a challenge. Scammers operate globally, and they really do not care about data sharing, privacy legislation as such. So it's very important that not only globally we work together, but especially also across the industries, both public as well as private sectors. And 2 years ago, when we organized our first summit in Asia, for the first time, at least I came in touch with the Singapore Anti-Scam Center, where a lot of resources, a lot of stakeholders are working together to better protect consumers. And since then, the concept has taken further, with also Australia, Philippines, and other countries launching in one way or another an anti-scam center in their country. At our summit in London last March, we came really together with many stakeholders, including my guests, Simon Miller from Cifas, Els Bruggeman from Euroconsumers, and Alex West from PricewaterhouseCoopers, to dive into the topic. What benefits can such a national anti-scam center bring? And without further ado, I would like to introduce my guests. Els, would you mind briefly introducing yourself and your organization?
Hi, so thank you, Yuri. Thank you for having us. So I'm Els Bruggeman, and I work for Euroconsumers as Head Policy Enforcement and Communication. Euroconsumers is a global group of 5 membership-based organizations in Belgium, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Brazil. And as such, we represent more than 6 million people.
Thank you very much, Els. Simon.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Simon Miller. I'm the Director of Policy, Strategy, Communications and Marketing at Cifas. So Cifas is the UK's leading fraud protection service. We are a membership organisation of about 800 members, including from the technology, telecoms and financial services sector. We also manage the UK's largest holding of cross-sector fraud risk data in the National Fraud Database. I'm delighted to be here with you all this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Simon. And last but certainly not least, Alex.
Thank you, Yuri, and I'm sorry I had some technical challenges that meant I left the call, so I wasn't just late to speak at the webinar. Hi everyone, I'm Alex West. I'm a partner at PwC in the UK, and I lead our UK banking and payments fraud practice. We advise global institutions on how to protect their customers from fraud.
Thank you very much, Alex. And maybe to stay with you, we just launched our joint white paper about national anti-scam centers called United Against Scams. Could you maybe briefly introduce the white paper? What's being discussed? Can you make a brief synopsis?
Yeah, of course. I mean, firstly, it was an absolute pleasure to work with GASA and with Cifas and Euroconsumers on the paper. And I think it's a good illustration of collaboration and the benefits that can bring to tackling fraud. The paper, as you say, Yuri, looks at the concept of national anti-scam centres and explores how that construct could potentially benefit national responses to fraud. The paper's international in focus, so we don't look at a specific country or jurisdiction. We explore the different roles that anti-scam centres could have, the challenges in current responses to fraud that they could address, the benefits they could deliver, and then also what are some of the core components, core design principles of a successful anti-scam centre, which I know we're going to come on today. The paper's available on our website, on the PwC website in the UK, but also I think on your website, Yuri. So take a read, but we'll go through some of the highlights today, I think.
Yes, we certainly will. Maybe a question to you, Alex. I mean, is there one way to do a national anti-scam center, or does it differ per country?
It differs per country, yeah. So I think, what is an anti-scam centre, the role it can play can look very different in every jurisdiction. I think what we've kind of focused in on the paper, the core concept of an anti-scam centre is it's a place for collaboration. So it's a way of bringing different organisations together, which might have individually different remits, different objectives, and trying to network those groups into a single cohesive approach. So it's that focal point for collaboration. How that is deployed in any given country, any different market, will need to be sensitive to history, to existing organisations, to legacy, and that means that each anti-scam centre will look very different. What's the best way of knitting together what's already there? So there's no fixed blueprint. I think some of the examples you referenced earlier, Yuri, will touch on in terms of what's there already. But this is at its heart, it's a concept of how do you knit together what's there already to make what's there more effective.
Got it. Simon, I mean, the United Kingdom has been fighting scams for a very long time. They have been, how you say, an early adapter. Maybe that's the wrong word. Could you describe what is the situation in the UK?
I mean, what an extraordinary question with which to start off. So the UK has been in the midst of the scams emergency for a number of years. By any measure, scams and fraud are the dominant crime type. So fraud accounts for between 41 and 43% of all reported crime in the UK. By volume, fraud is £219 billion lost to the UK economy each year by some measures, and scams around 10 billion of that, with about 81 billion lost through public sector fraud. So it is a huge issue. It's experienced every day by almost everyone. And the UK's response hasn't been historically a national anti-scam centre. It has been a public-private partnership that draws together multiple different agencies, including 43 different police services and 19 different government departments. But increasingly, we are moving towards a model that has many of the characteristics of a national anti-scam centre, because the experience of the UK is that public-private partnership without leadership doesn't get you where you need to be. The scammers simply move too quickly. And having authority for tackling scams dispersed across so many organisations isn't effective either. So now we have in Lord Hanson, the UK's first ever Minister with Responsibility for Fraud, and a whole tendency towards finding models that enable collaboration effectively and quickly and enable people to keep pace with the scammers. So an early adopter, many lessons learned, but also now learning from other jurisdictions who have the benefit from going second or third.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And moving maybe to you, Els. I mean, what do you see in Europe and maybe also outside of Europe?
Yeah, and indeed, a national anti-scam center. What's in a name? It sounds a little bit like we're inventing the wheel, but in fact, like you said, we have been seeing some sorts of national anti-scam centers popping up in Europe, but also over in the entire world. And they're all very different, but they all start from the same experience and the same ambition. How can we join forces to fight that monster, which is frauds and scams, in a more efficient way? And some of them are early adopters. For example, Canada has already an anti-scam center since 1993, and this one is more government-led, or at least led by the authorities. It's a reporting tool, a way to share intelligence. They focus on cross-border enforcement and getting the money back. But most of the examples that we see are a little bit younger. For example, the one in Australia, which is then more a public-private collaboration. At least they coordinate efforts coming from government law enforcement and private entities, but they also set specific public-private task forces to tackle specific kinds of scams. You mentioned already the example of Singapore. There's also one in Taiwan, but also, I mean, for me, next door, you have the Netherlands with the Fraude Help Desk, and this one is then more focused on the victims. At least it's a contact point for victims to reach out for, and then you get referred to the right support center. But, you know, getting all of this intel in this reporting in, it also allows the organization to, you know, discover trends and also flag it and send out alerts. Just to say, you know, none of them is the same. They're all very different, but that's not a problem at all. They all have their merit and their value. And more importantly, they all fit the national situation. And I think this is one important point that we really need to stress. Whatever we want to set up a national anti-scam center, it should start from a thorough mapping of on-ground reality and on-ground already existing initiatives. There's no need to duplicate things. Please don't kill those, you know, dynamics, those grassroots dynamics with a top-down approach. No, bring them in, connect the dots, and build something up, bottom up. I started by saying, like, it sounds like we're inventing the wheel. It's not, but maybe these examples can be at least some kind of a light bulb, sharing the experience, what works, what doesn't work, and based on that, you can build your own national anti-scam center.
Thank you very much, Els. Maybe going back to Simon, I mean, as you said, UK has been an early adapter. What do you see as the challenges for a national anti-scam center? What did you see in the UK?
So I think Alex touched on this earlier when he talked about the need to adapt really empathetically and sensitively to local conditions. So the UK, as I said, has 43 different police forces with a responsibility for tackling scams and 19 different government departments. Bringing these together whilst maintaining historic jurisdictions, independence, focus, is a really complicated thing, as also bringing together the different sectors that deal with scams on a daily basis, across banking, across telecoms, across technology. So I think one of the key challenges is how you cut through the conflicting commercial sensitivities and differing objectives around scams, because what's important for a telecoms company is not necessarily going to be the same thing that's important for a bank. That means clear direction setting. In the UK, setting clear direction can only come from the top, given its diffuse model, which is why a structure like a National Anti-Scam Centre is going to be so important for moving things forward. I'll just add to that, we have in the UK the National Economic Crime Centre, which increasingly has a proactive coordinating role. What we need to see is more direction to then incentivise industry to be able to do the right things at pace. So political leadership is key to all of this.
One of the things you named earlier was Lord Hanson. We had the honor to welcome him at our summit we organized together in London. Is such a person, a minister, essential to make it a success in a country, in most countries, or is it UK specific?
So in the UK, having a government minister there with a dedicated responsibility for tackling scams is absolutely critical for cutting through some of the issues we have experienced in marshalling a fast and effective scams response. It isn't necessarily critical, but some form of leadership from the top that other organisations have to look to take direction from is going to be central to having a successful centre, I think, in most places. It may not be a minister, it may be, as per the example in Singapore, a police authority, or as in Australia, a collaboration between public and private sector, but with the backing and legislation. I think that's a key difference in Australia of the public elements of that authority. So leadership function, critical, having an ability to be able to set policy is absolutely vital, and it being able to lead by example is key to that as well.
Thank you very much, Simon. Els, maybe back to you. What would you like to see in Europe? What would be the ideal for, I mean, Euroconsumers is representing consumers. What would be your ideal?
Well, as you know, Yuri, we have been a vocal advocate of more centralization and collaboration already for a while, and it initially and primarily was driven by the victim, the consumer perspective. I mean, can you blame me? I do represent a consumer organization. But really, I mean, being a group of 5 membership-based organizations, you know, having a direct line, having a bit of finger on the pulse, hearing these stories every day, very tangible. It was really baffling to us to see how difficult the journey was that we sent scam victims upon when they are basically looking for support and for redress. And there are 3 things where we believe that national anti-scam centers can make a difference. First of all, it starts with, you know, where to go to when something goes wrong. Where do you report? We know from contacts with consumers, but also from our surveys, that only half of them reaches out because the rest is too ashamed. They don't think it will make a difference, or they don't even think or even know that reporting is an option. And when they do reach out, they mostly go to friends and family. Only 1 out of 3 goes to the police and to the banks. And we need them to report because they need the support, but also we need this kind of data to actually catch the guys. But what will we do? We send them to the banks send them back to the police send them back to the banks, and then also you need to report with the telcos and the platforms, because maybe it would be good if they would actually block the guy. I mean, half of people don't even bother, but honestly, can you blame them? So that's why we're thinking, let's turn it around a little bit. What if instead of sending, you know, victims at their most vulnerable from one place to the other, what if instead we send up one central contact point where all of them, all these stakeholders work together for the victims? One central point where they need to report only once, not 7 times. And if needed be, this data can be shared with, you know, the other stakeholders in the value chain. That's one thing. But it's not just about the reporting. It's also about the answer, the response, the care that is given to these victims. And it was really striking to see how difficult it was for them to get adequate responses. Being a scam victim, it comes with financial impact, horrible stories. But as if that isn't enough, it also comes with a huge emotional toll. You have the shame, the guilt, the anger, the anxiety, the stress. And that's really something to take into account when a victim comes to you. You cannot put your average call center guy on it. At a certain moment, a scam victim told me, a scam survivor told me, actually the journey after the scam was even more traumatizing than the actual scam. So we need to make sure that these people are not re-victimized all over again. They are not being called stupid or being blamed. You know, being a scam victim comes with emotional toll, and it requires proper care. Care that maybe not all of the stakeholders are equipped to deliver. And that's also where a national anti-scam center can come in. Next to being that central point where you can report, also that point where you can get the proper support. Emotional support, information, but maybe also legal support, for example, when they don't get the money back. That's the second point. And then finally, next to the advantage of having the single reporting point and the victim care, there's also a third advantage for consumers in having this national center. I mean, we've been talking a lot, focusing a lot on the story after, but there's also a story before, preventing scams from happening in the first place. And we see many wonderful organizations setting up many wonderful initiatives, but honestly, scam awareness will not happen from one single person, from one single organization alone. Impact happens when we can scale. And if we can collaborate, everyone, all stakeholders working on it in the framework of a national anti-scam center, we can make good things grow. You can share your experiences, duplicate best practices, or elevating a really good campaign with more scale and with more money. In short, you can be more effective, more profound, and more consistent. So all in all, the reporting tool, the victim care, and more in-depth and effective awareness campaigns, I believe these are three amazing things that a national anti-scam center can already make the difference for its victims.
Sorry, I mute myself. Thank you very much, Els. So if I understand you correctly, you really see a national anti-scam center, or whatever it's being called, because it will differ per country, really covering the entire chain, from coordinating maybe awareness, making reporting easier and more centralized, and of course also victim support, from guiding, legally counseling, etc. I fully also echo what you're saying. What we, as you know, we do a study amongst 50,000 consumers every year, and we see every year that the number of people who are reporting scams is slowly dropping. Doesn't make sense, doesn't help, I don't know where to report. But if people report, then they report to 3 or 4 organizations because they don't know where. So I think that's indeed what you highlighted. Alex, moving to you, GASA's dream is that every country, in one way or another, starts building a national anti-scam center. And what do you consider the essential building blocks for success on doing so?
Yeah, I think it goes to the original point we were saying, isn't it, Yuri, about that every country will have a slightly different structure and a slightly different approach. And one thing I was reflecting on listening to Simon and Els is that there are really good reasons why existing national infrastructures are set up in the way they are, often with fragmentation, because fragmentation can also mean specialization, where each different organization has a very specific role and remit. And I don't think we shouldn't necessarily associate fragmentation or even some degree of siloing with being an inherently bad thing. I think what we're saying with an anti-scam center, again, as you say, whatever you call it, is that where you have lots of different organizations all trying to tackle different elements of the puzzle, you need to find a way of, for some of those activities, trying to bring them together. And I think fraud is probably, I was going to use the word unique, and I'm sure there'll be someone out there that will challenge me, but fraud is certainly very often spanning so many different platforms and services, unlike other types of crime, that you do need that coordination, collaboration across different platforms, services, police forces, authorities, because it is certainly different, if not unique in its span. I think that to bring that collaboration together and that sort of pooling of resources, I think the top capability, the top requirement is for leadership. Now, whether that's political leadership or a critical mass of private sector organizations that come together with a will to drive something forward, I think doesn't matter. And every country will have slightly different political circumstances that mean that authorities have different abilities to drive change and influence organizations to participate. But I think leadership and that sort of seed organization that starts and builds, I think is probably the most critical element from my point of view, because without that, how can you possibly corral people and bring them together? I think that's one. I think that what the Scam Centre does will depend specifically on the national requirement. So whether that's having a single reporting framework, that might already exist in some countries, it might not. Whether that's about data sharing, again, it's going to depend on what's there. For me, the key elements are leadership, some form of shared impact and objectives that are linked to that, and then capabilities that are built in relation to what's actually going to help the local framework, the local environment. Does that make sense?
Yes, it certainly does.
Yeah.
But you are also tipping a difficult point. I mean, one of the benefits of such a national anti-scam center is data sharing. Simon, Cifas has been working on this for a long, long time. I think you can share some of the challenges or key criteria for success here.
So, what a question. So data sharing is always presented as the solution to anti-scam activity. We talk about collaboration, but it's collaboration for the purposes of sharing data. And let's be really clear about that. The more data we can share, the more effective solutions will be. We've been sharing PII data with our members for almost 38 years now, and we've been doing it so highly effectively and at scale, but there are real limitations to how much data you can share and who. One of the key challenges is in the fraud prevention world, in the anti-scam world, we all speak the same language, but often at very, very different purposes. And one of the key things that holds collaboration back is that different sectors, different industries, different firms, different law enforcement agencies and different government departments will talk about the same things in very, very different ways. So when we want to share data, we've got to be absolutely clear on what the goal is. Now, for us as an organization, we know what that goal is. We talk about eradicating fraud and economic crime, but our purview is relatively limited. For others to be able to share data with us, they need to be able to buy into that, or they need an incentive to be able to do that. And that's where a national anti-scam centre can have so much influence and have so much effect in setting really clear priorities for what needs to be shared, with whom, and for what purpose. When we look at some of the examples of very effective data sharing that are starting to emerge now, particularly in the preventative space, if we look at, for instance, the nascent global signal exchange, it is sharing scam data at scale because it's doing so with a really specific purpose in mind and in a way where that data is actionable and can be used by the parties receiving that. Getting to that point is very complicated. Getting to that point in the discussion in which there is little or not enough leadership can be painful, can be difficult, and waste time. And the only people who benefit from that wasted time are the scammers, who move and jump from platform to platform, from service to service with absolute impunity, and do so irrespective of law. So when we look at our experience of data sharing, it's all about focus, it's all about purpose, it's all about observance of governance and having absolute clarity of why. National anti-scam centres can bring that mindset to a national level, and ideally then can combine with other national anti-scam centres to do it globally, which is where the effort ultimately needs to be.
Yeah, I see that's also one of the questions we received. Should there be a global anti-scam center to connect the different national centers? Els, Alex, would one of you like to reply to that question, or Simon?
Shall I have a first go, Els, and then you're welcome, obviously, to add. I think we can all imagine a world where once you have a coordinated national response, networking those national capabilities internationally makes a lot of sense, because we all know fraud is a transnational issue. Frauds rarely stay within individual borders. So having that connectivity, I think, stronger connectivity can only be a good thing. And obviously there are existing pathways for information sharing and collaboration across borders. But I think that the concept of the ASC is about creating that focal point where it's really clear for either consumers or organizations or international organizations. They know where to go to have that conversation. And that just, I think, inherently makes collaboration easier and people more connected. So yes, I think that's the answer. What they will individually look like in each territory and how they work together, Yuri, I think is to be explored. But I think that's the dream, isn't it? That you have this kind of shared network of organizations working together.
Thank you. Els, would you like to comment?
Oh, well, of course, I fully agree with Alex's. I wouldn't dare otherwise. No, but jokes apart. I mean, it's also one of the building blocks. I mean, what is a key building block at a national level is, of course, a key building block at a global level. I mean, in the end, what is important is to bring in the right people, the right organizations with the right skills. Success of every national anti-scam center or a global one will lie in the ability to connect all the stakeholders working on it in the frauds and scams, and to focus again on the national level. I mean, there's no need to reinvent the water or to duplicate things. If you already have solid on-ground organizations doing great work, well, embrace it and just connect the dots, pull everyone in together. And if a stakeholder is missing, go looking for it and fill in the loopholes. And to that regard, I mean, you won't blame me again, I do represent a consumer organization, but it is, I mean, I think it's important to also involve the consumer organizations, the big victim organizations, basically every organization experienced with handling scam victims. And I just want to stress this because it's something that sometimes is very much overlooked. We tend to focus a lot on enforcement, on the data sharing, on the financial aspect, and that's all so very necessary. But please do not lose sight of also the victim impact, and that's why we need to have them on board. They already get the calls every day. They already hear the stories. They already have the contacts. They already have the expertise. If you can include them in a larger network of, for example, a national anti-scam center, they can be also there to handle the aftermath, give them the right information on where to go to give survivors emotional support, or if needed be, refer them to professional help, which is also unfortunately sometimes necessary. But like I said, it could also be some form of a legal support. For example, if they're having troubles in getting the money back, victim organizations, consumer organizations can be there to support them. And if you have everyone connected in this network nationally and ideally also globally, well, then you have a network, then you have multidisciplinary teams in place that can handle every sector. And it will make it all very efficient and more effective to actually tackle the scams together.
Got it. I see another question in the chat, and please, to the audience, feel free to use the chat to ask more questions. A question from Mario is, a lot of scams originate from social media platforms. They refuse to share data. Should they be compelled by national governments to do so? Is that realistic? Is it feasible? Any of you like to comment on this question?
Shall I have first go, and then
course,
my colleagues can tell me I'm wrong quite happily afterwards. So I think when we look at the role of social media, and social media organizations are part of Cifas, we need to be really careful what it is that we're asking for. And this points to some of the complexity around the debate. What we want to see is scam content removed. If we can remove scam content, we're preventing the scam from happening in the first instance. So the question should we compel social media companies to share? It's actually what information can we get to the social media companies to enable them to do the right thing? I think lots of us come from a world in which data sharing comes in certain forms, and it's largely being formed by the experiences of the banks. Now, is that model relevant to telecoms? Is it relevant to e-commerce? Is it relevant to other sectors? Probably not in a purist form, and we need to adapt the model to make it work, and we need to look at what works and make that our starting block. Because actually, social media companies are increasingly sharing signals with one another, and that is to be welcomed. The global signal exchange is absolutely built on the bulk sharing of scam signals and ensuring they are taken down at pace. It is that will cut off that vector to the scammers, and where our efforts need to be focused, rather than trying to create very, very complicated new data sharing arrangements. And I think anyone who's a policy watcher, particularly in the UK, will be acutely aware of the horror show that was the attempt to create an NHS supercomputer about 15 to 20 years ago. Always start with what you have, iterate it up, look to what works, rather than trying to create entirely from afresh. That is the best way of achieving success, particularly in this multipolar world in which we're functioning.
I think indeed it's better to, as Elsa was also saying, not reinvent the wheel, but unite what's already out there and then take small baby step forward. Alex, I believe you also wanted to comment on this question.
Oh, well, only to say, I think, first of all, I think the whole point of the ASC or concept is to try and bring a cross-sector approach to fraud as an issue. And I think we all know that, as we said earlier, fraud originates on telcos, on websites, on social media, but also in lots of other places as well. Is it important that you have all players in that ecosystem coming together and figuring out the best possible ways of tackling it? I mean, absolutely. How you do that, I think, needs to be sensitive to what's actually useful. I think one of the challenges when people talk about data sharing is conceptually, yes, of course, if we all had perfect knowledge of absolutely everything in the universe, then interventions could be designed to be extremely effective, but that's unrealistic. So the first thing we need to do is understand who has what data, but also what use case can that be put to. So, I totally agree with the concept of cross-sector data sharing, but what data, at what time, for what purpose, and how does that intervene in which kind of kill chain story? And I think that's the bit that an ASC can really support. It's that not just what data is there, but how is it most useful?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I have another elephant in the room, apart from data sharing, and that's called funding. I think in general, everybody says, yes, great idea. And then when you talk money, organizations get more quiet. Police is responsible for getting the bad guy. They're not responsible often, or not. They don't take the responsibility of victim support. And I see in very few countries there's victim support, especially because of a lack of funding. Simon, how could we solve this problem? Any ideas from your side?
So I think solving the problem is probably a bit beyond me, and I think the answer is going to be dependent on the circumstances of each nation in which a national anti-scam centre is built. I think the key thing is that all parties are at the table. I think the key thing is as well that people play a full and fair role in the creation of a national anti-scam centre. I think in the vast majority of cases, there will be a clear case for some public sector funding to get ideas off the ground, to move things along. And that has been, I think, where we have seen greatest impact and effect. I think we should never underestimate the importance of policy for making things happen. So moving away from exactly who should fund what elements of what, to saying, actually, if there's a policy ambition, say to reduce the incidence of investment scams by 10% in a jurisdiction over the next 12 months, what's the best way of achieving that, and using those existing rails to get to that point? I think so. Just to reiterate, then, some public sector seed funding in the first instance, and looking to which parts of industry are best placed to meet the costs. Because saying each sector should pay an equal amount probably isn't the way forward, because that amount has to relate to some level of liability, proven liability in law. And that becomes incredibly complicated. So there is the ideal, there's what lots of people would like to see, and I think then there is what is realistic. And it's what is realistic that we have to work with, and that will very much be determined by local circumstances. Governments would always have the money, they will always have a role in this, law enforcement would always have a role in this. And I think once you set up something that is starting to deliver, that is when industry can much better start to meet the costs of that, because there's a clearer benefit to them.
Thank you very much, Simon. Alex, would you like to comment?
Only to say, in addition to what Simon said, which I agree with wholeheartedly, I think having one funding model is probably never going to quite work. So absolutely some centralized seed funding I think will be important, but I think when you've got so many different organizations coming together, having multiple funding models might be appropriate. So some organizations might have direct funding where they pay directly a cash amount to support the organization. You can imagine others potentially supporting in kind by providing access to technology or skilled staff on a secondment basis. You can imagine funding models where outputs of the analysis, of the data sharing might be commercialized and sold to organizations on a subscription model. I think these kind of organizations will need to have a blended funding model of multiple different types, and that will play into what they're doing, what the role they have, but also what works in their local market. That might be the longer term dream. I think to get it up and running, as Simon says, you need enough to get something started. So that's likely to need to become centrally, or I think perhaps from a consortium of private sector organizations that are willing to come together and fund something initially.
I mean, very creative, Alex. I mean, commercializing some of the services, or a joint model. Else, what is your view from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I would leave in the middle whether the money needs to come from public or private. I mean, personally, my organization is membership-based. We don't work with public funding, but the fact that there will need to be some money to get this started, it's a fact. And I just want to take a step back and look at the bigger perspective here, because you can say, okay, it costs again money, but not doing anything costs even more money. It costs money to the consumer. It costs money to businesses who are equally affected by frauds and scams. And I mean, I'm Brussels-based. Everything we hear right now is about European competitiveness. But if you have a look at the billions of euros that got lost into frauds and scams, that's money that cannot be invested in legitimate businesses, in a legitimate European economy. So if we want to turn this around, there's a huge opportunity to turn fighting frauds and scams into a competitiveness asset, a weapon to tackle, also or to boost our European economy. So I'm always a little bit surprised that it is not higher on the political agenda. But honestly, I believe if we could turn the money loss that we lose into frauds into something more legitimate, our economy, it can make a huge difference.
You're on mute, Yuri.
You're muted, Yuri.
Thank you very much. My apologies. I also want to give room to the questions in the chat. So a last question to all of you. I mean, the dream is every country in one way or another should have a national anti-scam center. And I think we agree that it will look very differently per country, depending on what's already out there and how you could slowly build it up. What are your organization's plan to accelerate this development in Europe, outside Europe, etc.? Who would like to answer the question first? Simon?
Thanks so much. It's always nice to be volunteered. So what are we doing as an organisation? We're working very, very closely with the UK government. The UK government is in the process of bringing forward a new fraud strategy. That will include new capability, new systems, new processes, and we want to be absolutely a part of that. But I think for us, it's about actually working with the UK government to ensure it engages globally, that it helps set an agenda and it brings other nations with it. Because I think the point that Els is making, for far too many countries, tackling fraud simply isn't the priority, and scams simply isn't the priority that it needs to be and should be. It should be seen as an absolute public good. So the funding point, well, clearly the proceeds of crime could also fund a national anti-scam centre, and that's one way potentially of ensuring that national anti-scam centres have a longevity. So for me, it's ensuring that we are being clear on what works, being clear in our ask of government for what will enable us to do more, and ensuring that governments do work together, but also taking part in events like this and indeed your global summits to bring forward the global argument and why national anti-scam centres and coordination at every level are clearly the way forward.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Els, may I have your perspective?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, bring in the consumer organizations, bring in the victim organizations, not for the sake of it, because I do believe with their on-ground experience, we will be able to build solutions in a more effective way, having their voices in, having their experiences in. And as far as my organization is concerned, all of the Euroconsumers organizations stand ready to be part of this coalition, to be part of this network, and do our tiny little bit in the bigger framework of a national anti-scam center. But I think next to enforcement, next to the financial, next to the digital aspect, bringing in those on-ground voices can really make a difference, and we stand ready to support that.
Super. Very happy to hear, Els. Alex?
Yeah, well, I think, firstly, the thought that's gone into this paper and the working together, I think, is an exact illustration of the role that we can play to convene stakeholders across the different industries. I think, as many of you know, PwC is a global organization. We're everywhere in the world, and we advise across tech, across telco, across banking, and across government. And I think that ability to bring those cross-sector perspectives and to convene different groups to talk about how these things might work in practice, I think that's certainly something that I'd like to see us doing more of, and a personal passion of mine.
Thank you very much, Alex. I also want to give the audience some room to pose some questions. I would like to start with the question of Ross. Ross is asking, given the explosion of scams on instant payment rails, are we over prioritizing real-time speed at the cost of context? What is the right level of friction? And I think related to that is, we have very little time. So how any of you would like to comment on this question? It's slightly related to national anti-scam centers in, where do we want to go?
Well, Ross is a good friend of mine, so I feel like I should at least
go ahead.
take on this. He's fed me the question, Simon. I'm sure you know him as well. I think probably Ross is thinking also about the introduction of the new SEPA regulations and the 10-second instant payment requirements. I think many of our clients in Europe are thinking very carefully about what that is and how to implement the right monitoring and capability, and whether that means more friction and slower payments, I think is a debate that is still being had in many institutions. I think generally, an answer to the question, should we expect to see more friction, more control in payments? I think probably directionally that's where we're going, and that's what consumers are starting to expect more of, control, security over ease of payment. Taking that back to an ASC context, well, how do you do that smartly? Right, so you need information, you need data to intervene at the right time and the right place, and to do that, you need to understand more about the context, as Ross says, and understand what the customer is doing across multiple platforms, and that's the role of an ASC, to bring that data together to support that.
Got it. Simon, else, any of you like to comment?
Just to add further, I think it was the faster payment system and instant payments that made the UK so attractive to scammers. Was one of the things that made the UK so attractive to scammers in the first instance. The rule changes that were introduced by the payment system regulator last year, which mandate instant or mandatory reimbursement for people who lose money to scams, also included within it provisions that enabled some banks to slow down certain transactions. So I think, whilst the direction of travel is going to be very much towards the ever-increasing instancy of payments, a greater proportion of those payments will be slowed down in order to ensure that where they are suspicious, where there is good reason, they can either be delayed to enable further investigation to take place or stopped. And that is the expectation of consumers. I think on that point, Alex is exactly right. But that's not going to stop us all from using our Apple Pay wallets every time we touch in and touch out of our public transport networks or whatever else. And these are the things that we need to keep in balance. So it will be slices of our payments that are slowed, whilst everything else probably moves towards faster, even faster payments.
Thank you very much, Simon. Else, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act, and I want to build on also what Alex and Simon said. It's part of a bigger picture here. I mean, I do not want to be put in a situation where tackling fraud is putting right against consumer protection or consumer convenience. I mean, it will be a little bit of giving and taking, but knowing that in Europe, it is still extremely hard for consumers to ever get money back when they fall victim to fraud. I mean, we're a little bit jealous of the UK situation. You need to see everything in a bigger picture. Yeah. Do we give in? I mean, is this something you give in as a consumer in terms of protection, in terms of convenience, and what do you get in return for it?
Yeah, it's always a balancing act indeed. I want to show one last question from the audience, from Rens. A lot of scams have a time of life of 24 hours. We know also from our study amongst 50,000 consumers that nearly 70% of all scams happen within 24 hours. It goes very, very quickly. How can we turbocharge, I love the name, anti-scam centers to really protect consumers in, knowing the fact that scams happen very quickly? Alex, may I give you the floor first?
I can have a go. I feel like Els might disagree with me on this, so I'm warming myself up for the debate. I think a really important role of an ASC or of any kind of data consolidation is to try and take as much of the responsibility out of the hand of the consumer, so that a lot of this is happening invisibly in the background. So don't get me wrong, I think education and awareness is really important, but I think ideally you have a situation where the technology that monitors what you're doing is so good at spotting the suspicions that you're prompted very smartly and very precisely when something's going wrong. Now, of course, there's a whole lot of behavioral science and how you do that effectively as well, but I think we know when we've got this right, when ASCs are powering really smart, targeted interventions that are really, really accurate. I think that's the role of an ASC.
I think that's a nice one for you, Els. And I know...
surprise, I do not entirely disagree with you, Alex. No, there's not one consumer who is waiting to be scammed for the... I mean, everyone wants to prevent it. So I agree, there is space for awareness and education. But I also want to pull in, the benefits of AI here. I mean, AI, it has made our lives, or at least it has made our lives in tackling scams a bit more complicated, because scams get so sophisticated because of AI, but we can also use it to fight them. And I mean, first of all, to make sure to prevent that scams are happening. And I think there's a huge possibility to develop more AI tools there so that scams do not reach consumers in the first place. It's not only about raising awareness and educating consumers, it's about protecting them on all kinds of platforms, telcos. Everyone needs to do their bit. The banks, to make sure that consumers stay safe of these scams, and technology can help there. But also when it comes in terms of reporting, I mean, also AI tools can be helpful there for consumers. So you have a 24/7 possibility to go and flag a scam, and you know what technology and AI can do. Maybe we can turn it into a super booster to actually alert other people on this.
Maybe, Els, to challenge you a little bit more, and forgive me, what we see in Singapore is they really have one room where law enforcement, banks, telecom operators are sitting together. And if a call comes in with, I just wired 50,000 Singapore dollars and I think I've been scammed, the law enforcement officer can walk to the bank and say, freeze the account, which is great. But where is the border? Because one of the things now also came into effect in Singapore is that if a law enforcement officer really believes that a victim is being scammed, he can also freeze the bank account without the consent of the owner of that bank account. And I can imagine that there are situations where this might be understandable. I mean, one of my experiences a while back was that I spoke to an elderly lady, probably 80 years old, from Norway. She had lost 700,000 euros in a scam. And she was convinced that she could get her money back, but she was actually still in contact with the scammer and still paying him. And I really tried to convince her, please stop and contact your family, contact the police, because you're still being scammed. And I could not convince her. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion here? And I know I'm surprising you with this question. So where do we have to stop and make it the responsibility of the consumer?
Oh, that's really
sorry.
A difficult question. That's a very difficult one. I think, it's also happening, for example, in Belgium, when a bank suspects that you're being scammed, your account is being blocked. Of course, if they contact you afterwards and you keep on being convinced that it's not the case and that this person that you know or that you love, then you enter into this kind of a gray zone, and how far can you go? But all in all, I hope at least that this is not the majority of the cases, that the majority is a little bit more straightforward, and there are means that banks can detect where you're being scammed, and it needs to come from more data sharing across countries as well, that because they do not know borders. If they're scamming in one country, they're going to scam in another. So this needs to be going a bit more fluidly. scams have become so sophisticated, not only because of technology, because also they use social engineering. They know they know your soft points. They know from all kinds of information that they get from social media or data breaches. They know your pressure points, and that's why it becomes so difficult for consumers right now to stand up against these scams or even to recognize them. And more than ever, I believe we need others to step up. They have more means, they have more tools. In the end, it's up to them to keep consumers safe and make sure they have a trusted digital environment, be it in a banking and a financial environment, be it in platforms, be it on telcos, on telco platforms. So it's, I mean, the evolution of a scam is evolving. It's evolving in that way that we need more of the others to step up. Of course, that doesn't mean we need to let go of consumer education, but I feel like there's only so little you can do with consumer education anymore right now, because it is becoming so sophisticated and so well designed.
Can I follow up on that point really quickly?
Yes,
I think Elle makes some absolutely fantastic points there. If you look at how the advent and use of AI by criminal gangs in the context of investment frauds has moved on at such pace, it's not just a question of people receiving calls or being manipulated by phone. The scammers will be creating a whole fake news media that substantiate the claims that they are making, backed by call centers, backed by websites, backed by a range of other collateral. The idea that any of us can differentiate that reality from what is genuinely real, I think is a really difficult case to make. The best thing that we can all do to keep people safe from scams is preventing them from happening in the first instance. And I think that's where national anti-scam centres can be so valuable, is in directing that effort, setting that priority, and clearing the way for law enforcement, for industry, for consumer groups to be able to do the right thing by people as quickly, as effectively as possible. So I think when we look at an anti-scam centre, a national anti-scam centre, the best thing that it can do is light the way, mark a path, and then enable the key players in those sectors across those parts of society to do the right thing.
I couldn't have summarized it better, Simon. And also what else was saying. Scammers are getting too good. We need to unite against scams, and I think the national anti-scam centers are one way of protecting consumers better. And we need to wrap up, but I want to thank you, Simon, and Els for not only contributing today, but actually since March, where we started working together on how can we bring this idea of a national anti-scam center further. I especially also want to thank Alex and the team from PricewaterhouseCoopers, because you had the huge challenge to merge all our thoughts and ideas into a white paper. And I also like to thank the audience for being here. The white paper is available on PricewaterhouseCoopers and on GASA.org, so if you would like to download it, please do so. Please also send us your comments and ideas and feedback. Together with Cifas, Euroconsumers, and PricewaterhouseCoopers, we will continue our struggle to make national anti-scam centers really something countries are going to consider more and more. And the first place where we are going to unite again is in Washington, D.C. on the 3rd and 4th of December at our Global Anti-Scam Summit America. So again, a big thank you to you, Els, Simon, and Alex for helping us covering this topic and bringing it further. And I'd love to see you all in America to take it further, and hopefully also next year in Europe and Asia. Thank you very much all for attending, and I wish you a very, very good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.